You know, there's a lot of comic book TV shows that are out there. There's Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. There's Daredevil Season 2, which was better than 1 or 3. There's Loki, there's WandaVision, Hawkeye, all that stuff. But every single one of those Marvel TV shows, DC TV shows, a whole 9 yards, they all suck compared to Heroes Season 1. Now, I don't know how many of you guys out there ever saw Heroes when that show came out. I remember when that show first came out. They were doing like the trailers and everything for it. You guys remember the trailer? Like the trailer for Heroes? It was Hayden Panettiere or whatever, as a cheerleader. She was at like the top of some thing in a construction site, like a half-finished building. She jumped off, she dislocated her elbow and like just smashed her face and it healed. And she's just like, my name's Claire Bennett, and this is attempt number whatever. Like, those little trailers, like, they were just so amazing, right? Here's the thing. For those of you guys who never saw Heroes, one, I would suggest you watch Season 1 and then stop. All the seasons after that were garbage. But I would suggest you watch Season 1. Although the villains were cool. Do you guys remember the villains they had when they were like the level 5 villains? Like the really, really dangerous villains. You had the one guy who could create black holes, like literally create like vortexes. That was nuts. You had Nox who could absorb people's fear and it like amplified his physical strength. It was really, really cool, right? You had all these different guys who were out there. But Heroes Season 1, that show was phenomenal, right? It was so great because from beginning to end, it was nonstop like suspense and it was wildly interesting. So here's the deal, right? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this show. For those of you guys who are foolish enough to say, I don't want to watch it, let's talk about this show, right? What you had here is you basically had this idea that you had all these characters who had different powers. So Peter Petrelli was actually an empath. He was a mimic. He could duplicate the powers of anybody he saw. And then there came a point when he didn't even have to be in their proximity. All he had to do was think about them, and then he could use their powers. You had other stuff too, other characters that were out there, Ali Larter's character and so on and so forth. But for the core basis of this story, all we really knew is that you had a point where Peter Petrelli was visited by a guy named Hiro Nakamura. Now, Hiro Nakamura, this guy was amazing. He was like the fan favorite of the show because he was basically this Japanese dude who was kind of nerdy and had the ability to manipulate time. He could travel back and forth through time. He could freeze time. He was arguably the most powerful character in the entire show. And so there came a point when Peter Petrelli in the present day was visited by a future version of Hiro Nakamura who was just like, he's like, you look different without your scar and stuff like that. He's like, but you have to save the cheerleader from Sylar. Now, Sylar was the overarching villain of the show. And the one thing I never liked about Heroes is that they revealed the identity of Sylar. I wish he had just stayed this mysterious character. Because those of you guys who never saw Heroes, for like the first half of the show, you never see Sylar's face. You see, it's like a silhouette. Sometimes you kind of see bits of it. Like once they officially cast Zachary Quinto as Sylar, you actually, like you realize it was him. But all you would see was like his beard, right? Or you would see like his ear or something like that. But for the most part, he was just silhouetted. But he was this overarching guy. And what he was doing was traveling around, killing people and taking their powers. It was so cool. He was just collecting people's abilities. Like Sylar, I still say to this day, Sylar, God, I love that show. Sylar was one of like the absolute best villains in any comic book show ever. Like even in comics. Imagine what it would have been like if Sylar was a villain in like DC Comics. He's just like killing superheroes and taking their powers. Man, it was amazing. But like Hiro Nakamura is like, you have to save him from Sylar. You have to go find Isaac. You have to go find the painter. And so it's literally this cat and mouse game where like they're trying to find Isaac and then eventually trying to find the cheerleader, all that kind of stuff. And like Isaac has these paintings where the city of New York gets destroyed, different things like that. And so it's just like what in the world is going on? Like basically the whole idea is like the end times are coming. Like some event is going to take place where the whole of New York is going to be obliterated, like literally just wiped out in like what's essentially a nuclear explosion, like a detonation of sorts. And then you get like these really cool moments here and there. So like you have a character called the Haitian. The Haitian was amazing. He could shut down people's powers because, oh my God, the first time you realize what he could do, it was when he shut down the powers of, oh my God, what was his name? The cop. You guys remember the cop? The guy who could read minds? he was like, oh, he was like the nicest guy, but like he could just never catch a break, and like his wife was cheating on him and stuff. What was that guy's name? Matt Parkman. That's what it is. Matt Parkman. Man, let me tell you something, dude. There comes a point, I think it's in season 2, although maybe it's in season 1, when they come across Matt Parkman's dad. It's Nathan Petrelli, Peter's brother, and Matt Parkman. And you think that like Matt Parkman's dad is like this relatively reasonable and gentle guy, and like his powers are basically the same as Matt's, but they're far more advanced. But he basically like locks Matt and Nathan Petrelli in their own heads and walks away. And it's crazy how powerful he was. Just this ridiculously powerful telepath. But Matt Parkman, oh my God, I love Matt Parkman. But you end up having this moment where basically his ability to read minds just shuts off, right? Well, it kind of fades out and then it goes away. And all you see in the corner is this guy called the Haitian, and you don't know anything about him. But then you also have horned rim glasses guy. You don't know anything about him at first. He's just this guy who's like obviously shady. He's not really the villain, but maybe he is kind of the villain, but Sylar's the main villain. So you're kind of wondering what's going on with this guy. And so Matt Parkman like wakes up in the middle of this quote unquote procedure where they're basically documenting his powers and learning how they work and so on and so forth. And then eventually he's let go. The Haitian and horn rim guy end up catching Nathan Petrelli. Right now, at this point in time, Nathan's running for like political office, like a senator or something like that. So it's no small thing to snatch this guy up. Now, the whole time, it's one of the best moments in the whole show. The whole time, Nathan is just this dude who never believes Peter, because Peter is like just discovering his powers, and he's telling Nathan things like he had dreamed that he had the ability to fly and stuff like that, and like he actually flew and so on and so forth. He's like, I really did fly. And like Nathan's like, look, dude, like whatever, because Peter's been like historically irresponsible, and so he's like, whatever, Peter, like I don't have time for this. I'm trying to run a campaign. Like their mom is there, which their mom turns out to be an amazing character in the show. But it's like all these different things. So eventually, like horn rim glasses guy and the Haitian, they finally get a hold of Nathan. Nathan wakes up in the middle of everything and like escapes, right? He goes running through this compound. He ends up at this fence, and there's no means of escape, and he just takes off into the air and flies. And that's when you realize Peter gained the ability to fly from Nathan, and Nathan's been hiding it this entire time. It was so crazy. It's just like I remember when that happened, I was like, what? Nathan can fly? No way. It was the craziest thing. It was the craziest thing, right? So there's all these different themes. Like you do have that one guy, I can't remember his name, but basically he was a walking, talking nuclear reactor. He could let off like insane amounts of nuclear energy. And so what ends up happening over the course of the show is you have the moment when finally like Peter Petrelli catches up to Hayden Panettiere, right? Catches up to the cheerleader in Odessa, Texas. Like she's at her prom and all that kind of stuff. And so Sylar shows up there at the same time, because there was this painting that had been drawn by Peter when he had come across Isaac and basically copied Isaac's powers, where he had drawn these different scenarios at like the cheerleader's high school and stuff like that. And they were all kind of clues that he had to piece together. Like, I'm supposed to be there, and this is how things are going to happen. So like Sylar shows up at the same time. Like, okay, so here's the thing. Back then, it was crazy because Peter confronts Sylar, and it's like the one thing you've wanted to see over the course of the show so far. Man, let me tell you something. There's like this telekinetic battle that happens between the two, because then you learn that Sylar has like telekinesis, and his powers up to that point are like ambiguous. Like he would be there one minute and then disappear the next. So it's like, okay, I guess he can move at super speed. He had killed one guy who basically had the ability to freeze things. Then you knew he had like the power to freeze stuff. You didn't necessarily see him use those powers all the time. It was just the victims that he had killed, you learned about their powers and realized this guy had those powers. So by the time Sylar had shown up at the high school and Peter Petrelli confronted him, Sylar probably had something like 10 or 11 different powers. It was nuts, right? It was crazy. And so what you get is what's basically like this 5-year time skip in the show, where they jump forward 5 years and show you what the future looks like. And one of the crazy things that happens, if I remember, I think this is in season 1, not gonna swear to it, but I think this is in season 1. And essentially, like once Sylar's identity is revealed and all this kind of stuff, what you end up learning is that Nathan Petrelli successfully became president of the United States. And the guy seemed a little shady, right? Like drunk on power and all that kind of stuff. And so then you also had things like Peter Petrelli, who had basically gone underground. You had, this was in season 1, because Matt Parkman becomes the head of the Department of Homeland Security after losing his family in like the detonation in New York, because that actually happens and New York gets destroyed. And so he's just like this terrible person, right? just this really cold-hearted son of a bitch. It's crazy. But you also have Hiro Nakamura, who's like routinely on the run, and basically the cast of the show, at least those who survived, are always just kind of on the move and trying not to get caught. And so there comes a point when the cheerleader is discovered, and the cheerleader is basically taken to Nathan Petrelli. And it's like this really, really cool moment, because there's a point, like something happens, I can't remember exactly what it is, but like she's talking to Nathan in the White House, and he's talking about how special he is. And he was like, I'm the leader of the free world, right? Like, I'm the most special person there is. And something happens, some kind of an argument, she goes to walk away, and she gets frozen in place. And then literally like the top of her head starts cutting, and that's when you realize it's Sylar. That Sylar had basically killed a woman who had the ability to duplicate, like, who was like Mystique from the X-Men. She could copy the form of other people. That Sylar had killed Nathan Petrelli, had been pretending to be Nathan Petrelli this whole time, presumably, I think, after Nathan became president, and then basically killed Claire. Like, he killed the cheerleader. And finally, after all this time, which is the one thing that Sylar was hunting for, he was indestructible. He couldn't be killed, because that was the power of Claire. She could heal from anything. So like, in order to prevent that future from happening, that's why Hiro went back in the first place, to stop this scenario where basically Sylar conquers the world. And so it's such a crazy thing, because it all leads to the city of New York. You end up having this whole thing where the guy who can let off atomic explosions ends up there as well. Peter absorbs his power because he can't control whose power he copies. He absorbs his power, and that's when you realize Peter's the one who blows up New York accidentally. And in the 5-year time skip, that was kind of the indication, is that Peter somehow had something to do with that, or was somehow responsible for it, or something along those lines. I don't think it was explicitly stated that was the case, but like at the end of the season, you find out Peter Petrelli's the one who blows up the city of New York. And so Nathan, in like this heroic sacrifice, like grabs Peter Petrelli and flies into the air. And then Peter Petrelli basically detonates, and it's like, okay, like Peter Petrelli died, like Sylar escapes, everybody kind of goes back to doing their thing, they're largely on the run. And then you got the trailer for season 2 at Comic-Con, and that was amazing. But see, man, Heroes, like I basically just ruined the show for anybody who hadn't seen it. Heroes season 1 it's the single greatest season of a comic book show in the history of any comic book show that's ever been written. It's better than Loki, WandaVision, all that stuff. And there's a ton of stuff we left out. I mean, it's just, there's all this stuff that goes on, right? It's one of the best shows ever. Don't watch Heroes, like Heroes Return. Don't watch that. That was terrible. Watch Heroes season 1 and then stop and never watch anything else. Because if you do, it's gonna totally ruin the show for you. Anybody who's ever watched all of Heroes will tell you the other seasons were garbage. The characters in the seasons were cool, but the other seasons were trash, right? They were absolutely awful. Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah, okay, I'm not even gonna ruin that. The stuff that Horned Rim Glasses guy was making the Haitian do. Do you guys remember that when it came to like Claire's family, her mom, and all that kind of stuff? It was nuts, right? It was crazy how all that was going down. But the show's phenomenal. I will die. I will die on this hill. Heroes Season 1 is the single greatest comic book TV show that has ever been made by anybody ever. It's not even really based on a comic. It was just created by, what is it, Tim King or Tim Kring or whatever his name is. It was not based on a comic. They had comics that tied into it, but it was not based on a comic. But Heroes Season 1 is the greatest comic book show that has ever been created. The greatest, superhero TV show ever made. If you've never seen it, you need to go watch it. It is phenomenal. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. It's literally just me ranting about this whole thing. Or we're gonna call it we need to talk about comic book TV shows, right? We need to talk about why comic book TV, every show is bad. I don't know what we're gonna title this, but we're gonna title this something super clickbaity. But Heroes was amazing, right? Make sure you guys go watch it. But thank you all for watching. Listen to me ramble for however long, and I will catch you all later. Peace.